Good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian. I will be your host today. I'm from Queensland Civil Infrastructure Foundation, TC. So today we have a presentation by Dr. Sarah McGrath from TERN, who will be presenting her PhD research that she did at ANU. And I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we're meeting. It's a beautiful day in the broader Meanjin territory. And I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional land and the elders past, present, and future. So Dr. Sarah McGrath did her Bachelor of Science and Honors at University of Melbourne, and then she moved to ANU to do her PhD research in gibbons in Cambodia. So we'll see some of her research there. But one very interesting fact that I saw while looking at her LinkedIn was that she had done a lot of volunteering in South Africa, Bolivia, Namibia, and Malaysia. So it'll be amazing to hear about your experience there as well. And then in December of 2023, she moved from ANU. She moved to this new role with TERN as a project officer for the Threatened Species Index. So, yeah.
Alright, hi everyone. So today I'm going to talk about my PhD research. This would have been possible without my wonderful co-workers and many other people. So first of all, cool. All right. So yeah, I completed my PhD at ANU, and I finished this last year. So for my PhD, I had to spend 12 months in Sai-Siem National Park in Cambodia. So it's in the northeast. I got to spend 12 months there over 2 consecutive dry seasons, so 6 months and then another 6 months. It was an incredible experience, but it wasn't without its challenges. At one point, I needed laser eye surgery, and also another time I sat at a tick nest. I got bitten 450 times, but they do make interesting stories at least. So today, I'm in Sai-Siem National Park. As I said, it's in the northeast. It's located in the Ratanakiri province and the Stung Treng province. These are two of the poorer provinces in Cambodia, so high levels of poverty. It is contiguous with Varachi National Park to the north. And Varachi actually borders Vietnam and Laos. So around the park, we have a number of villages, and people in these villages rely on the park for their livelihoods, such as food, traditional medicine, and income. The park is made up mostly of semi-evergreen and evergreen forests. Illegal activities do occur in the park quite commonly, including hunting and also illegal selective logging. I should mention too, the park looked like this at the time of my study. In 2023, so last year in August, the government did expand the boundary, and now it includes a biodiversity corridor to the south, and it's about 2,800 kilometers squared, whereas at this time it was about 575 kilometers squared, so quite a big difference. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the key findings from 3 of my 4 data chapters from my PhD. It's meant to transition nicely, but that's fine. First up is the hunting pressure on primates in the national park. All right, so the park has a high level of biodiversity, and this includes 6 species of primate, the Veun species of primate in the park. That includes 2 types of macaque, 2 langurs, the northern leg-cheeked crested gibbon, and it actually includes one of the largest known populations of this species in the world, and also the pygmy slow loris. I should mention at the time I studied, the long-tailed macaque was classified or considered vulnerable, but now it's endangered. So unfortunately, some of these populations have declined for various reasons. For example, the long-tailed macaque, in the past it was targeted for to place in to breeding facilities in Cambodia for export primarily to China and the USA for biomedical testing and research. So rather than animals being killed or just removed. This pygmy slow loris, so unfortunately there's been declines in encounter rates. The last time, to my knowledge, that this population was surveyed was in 2012, and people use this loris for traditional medicine primarily. A couple of studies were done in 2011, where people in the local villages were interviewed, and they did find that the Pygmy solaris at that time was being targeted for traditional medicine. They also found that the long-tailed macaque and the northern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon were being targeted most frequently for the pet trade. At the time of these studies in 2011, hunting with guns was not common, but unfortunately the use of homemade guns in the park since that time has increased. And just for a bit of context here, so commercially produced guns, these used to be widespread in Cambodia around the time of the Khmer Rouge and following the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s. But the government went and confiscated and destroyed these guns in the about 1993. So they weren't easily accessible after that point. All right, so we want to know, given the increase in homemade guns in the area, so how common is hunting in the park? What are the most targeted animals? For primates specifically, we wanted to know what are people hunting now, which species? Is this different to in the past? What methods they use? Why do they hunt them? Which species would they keep as a pet? Which primate is most wanted in general by buyers? And given this is an illegal activity, we wanted to know what were the perceived risks of encountering law enforcement in the park. For today's presentation, I'll just be focusing on the two primate-specific research aims. All right, so for this study, we spent 3 weeks in December 2017 conducting semi-structured interviews with the help of translators. We did this in 5 villages surrounding the park. 2 of these villages were predominantly Lao people, and 3 were predominantly Khmer people. And these villages were surveyed in the previous studies as well. Just to show you, this is where they were. So quite close to the park boundary there. So our participants, they had to be either the primary resource collector or the head of household. They need to be at least 18 years of age. They could be male or female, but typically they were male. Of course, participation was voluntary. And we used snowball samplings. This is where people recommended others that may want to participate, as we wanted to interview as many people as we could in the time that we were in each village, because we're there for about 3 to 4 days. We asked about 38 questions with multiple parts. So these interviews sometimes did go up to 80 minutes. We asked first off about general bushmeat consumption. Do they eat bushmeat? What do you hunt? What kind of animals specifically? And then we moved into primate specific questions. And then we finished up with the perceived risks of encountering law enforcement. The format of questions did vary. So there was a mix of yes and no questions, multiple choice and open-ended questions. And to aid in correct identification of the primates, we did actually show photos of each of these primates. It did become clear in our pilot study in one of the villages that people were referring to 2 types of loris rather than 1. So they were referring to the Pygmy solaris, which we know is conferred in the park, but also the Bengal solaris. This is consistent with other interviews in those villages, but the presence of this loris in the park hasn't been confirmed by the surveys yet. But moving forward, we did actually include the morphological differences, describe them between those 2 lorises. So we interviewed 96 people. Of these 96 people, 61 of them identified as current hunters. 29 were ex-hunters. Of the 61 current hunters, 23 of them hunt primates. And there are additional 23 current and ex-hunters that hunted primates in the past only. When we look at the hunting of primates, the past versus the present, we can see that currently the Pygmy solaris is hunted most. So all but 1 of the current primate hunters said they hunt this species. The Bengal solaris is hunted, but less by a smaller proportion of participants. And you can see here that in the past, the monkeys and gibbons were hunted more often or by a higher percentage of participants compared to the present. And that included the long-tailed macaque, which was hunted the most. And many people said that when they hunted primates in the past, they did use commercial guns to do so. So why do they hunt each of these primates? So we found that the monkeys and the gibbons were typically hunted for food, whereas the lorises were typically hunted for income. Some people also did use the lorises for personal use for their traditional medicine as well, because they could select more than one answer. So what methods do they use to hunt these primates? Again, there's a bit of variation here as well. So people could select more than one option. So they either solely or in combination with other methods. For the monkeys and gibbons, they used dogs, traps, knives, and other methods. Whereas for the lorises, they used traps as well. They also used slingshots, crossbows, and they also fought them by hand. I should point out too that lorises are nocturnal, so people hunted them at night, whereas the other species were hunted during the day, as they are diurnal. For homemade guns, a small proportion of current primate hunters are using homemade guns. The guns that they're using commercially produced guns. All right, so we asked all participants, even if they weren't current hunters or past hunters, whether they'd be willing to keep each of these primates as a pet, and had they done so in the past. And we found that no one had kept the lorises as pets in the past, and there was a least desired pride of choice for keeping as a pet, whereas the monkeys and the gibbon were in demand, and many people would be willing to keep them as a pet, and some had done so in the past. And the highest number of participants said they'd be willing to keep the gibbons as a pet. While we were in the villages, we did come across 2 northern pink-tailed macaques that were being kept as pets, but we're told that this wasn't actually intentional, that they'd just been caught in traps left out by other animals like wild boar and squirrels. All right, so in one of the previous studies in 2011, they asked whether the participants thought that the populations of primates had increased, decreased, or stayed the same compared to 5 years ago. At that time, the participants thought that they'd all declined in the previous 5 years. So we asked the same question, and between 66 and 77% thought that the monkeys and gibbon had actually increased, their population sizes had increased. For the lorises, for the pygmy loris, just over 35% thought the population declined. And for the Bengal loris, a lot of them just didn't know. They said this was because they just had never seen it before. We want to know for those people that still go into the forest, so they could be a non-hunter, ex-hunter, current hunter, as long as they just still went into the forest, what would they do if they saw each of these primates? And over 95% said they would ignore the monkeys and the gibbon, whereas between 40 and 45% of participants said they'd actually hunt the lorises. Now this number is actually higher, the number of participants is higher than those that are identified as current primate hunters, which indicates that people would actually opportunistically hunt these species. We wanted to know why current hunters weren't hunting other primates, and one of the most common answer here was that they don't have equipment. Others said that it was due to tradition, or they don't eat primates. And so overall we found that the pygmy loris is the most hunted and in demand primate in Veun Sai-Siem National Park, which is consistent with other studies. So all but one current primate hunter hunt the species. Buyers come from nearby villages, so Veun Sai, which is a nearby village, or they come from the Ratanakiri province capital, Bangalore. So not great news for the pygmy loris, but our study did show that the hunting of monkeys and gibbons is occurring but less frequently. But it's also really important that studies are done in the future. So further monitoring, like surveys of local people, monitoring the populations, especially because things can change. So there is the history of hunting monkeys and gibbons when there are guns available, commercially produced guns. If this is to change, hunting would likely increase. Also a note on the long-tailed macaque. So at the time of the study, I mentioned the population was vulnerable, the long-tailed macaque, but after 2019, scientists believe that the populations in Cambodia have declined again. So this is really important that we do more monitoring. All right, on to the second part now. Which is our study on the density and population size of the northern yellow cheek crested gibbon. So this is a collaboration with statisticians from the University of Auckland, so Ben Stevenson and Jing Liu. So, as I said, the non-allergic crested gibbon, so it has a very large population in Sai-Siem National Park, one of the biggest in the world. So gibbons are territorial, they're arboreal. This species is an endangered species and it was only described in 2010. This species is found in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So like other gibbons, they live in small groups, generally consisting of an adult male, adult female, and their offspring, but not always. So an average of 2 to 5 individuals in this species. So in most gibbons, they produce, all gibbons produce calls known as songs. In almost all of the 20 gibbon species, the male and the female will produce duets. And this is meant, they're thought to have several functions. It could, so for intergroup spacing, territorial defense, and also strengthening the pair bond between the adult male and adult female. Okay, so a common method for estimating densities of gibbons is by auditory surveys. So other primates may be, the densities may be assessed or estimated using line transects, but gibbons that live high in the canopy, they're arboreal and they're difficult to see. So a lot of people will use auditory surveys. So we can actually hear these loud calls. So gibbons in general, it's typically up to 2 kilometers. We can hear these duets. For Nomascus annamensis, the maximum hearing distance is thought to be about 1.5 kilometers. So generally, with these surveys, people will go out to predetermined GPS points, so listening posts, and they'll be stationed at those posts for at least 3 days, because gibbons don't call every day, and they'll record all the calls that they hear. All right, so this is where the call comes into it. So I've sped it up by removing the gaps. But in this call that you'll hear in a minute, basically there's an adult male in the first part, and then the adult female will make a call. And with the adult female, the offspring also join in. So hopefully it'll work. So that's what they said. I'm like, it's very cool, especially if you're standing under the tree that they're making that call in. It's so loud. I will say that little phase, that little part at the end, is the twitter phase, and that doesn't happen in every call. Sometimes they just cut that part off, and that's actually a good characteristic to write down for these auditory surveys to help distinguish different groups. All right, speakers buzzing now, but that's fine. So as I said, so one of the large populations of this gibbon is in park. In 2010, they estimated that there are about 456 different gibbon groups. This was also used in another study, the same data in 2016. But since that time, so since that 2010 survey, logging has continued. So legal selective logging. So people generally target high value trees for export primarily to Vietnam and China. This is some of the logging that I saw, that I saw in the park during that time. And so it actually knows the impact that this logging is having on those gibbons and that gibbon population. Therefore, we aim to estimate the population size and density of the gibbons. We also looked at, I'm going to assess the intensity of logging at different sites and also to determine what trees are being targeted most often. We wanted to determine the peak duetting time for this species. So we know that they call around sunrise. We wanted some more information about that. And also, given that the density of gibbons can be affected by different environmental factors and variables, we wanted to look at the relationship between different variables, including logging and gibbon density. Today I'll just be talking about the first aim and the fourth one. All right, so for the auditory surveys, so in the previous survey, they went to 13 sites. We went to the same 13 sites throughout the park in between January and April in 2019. So we have 3 listening posts at each site in a linear formation. They're separated by about 500 meters. And so, as I said before, we can hear gibbons up to about 1.5 kilometers away for this particular species. So this would be for the middle listening post there. We'd be at these listening posts for 3.25 hours every day, and we'd start them about generally half an hour before sunrise, since that's when they call around sunrise. So we'd record the stop and start time of all the calls that we heard, would record whether it was a duet or a solo male call. We'd also have the bearing, so it would write down the bearing and also estimate the distance. And the idea is you triangulate this triangulation and be able to point, like see where the location of the call was. In theory, everyone had heard that call. It doesn't always work like this beautifully, especially in hilly terrain. I've had ones where I'm like, oh, it's this way. Other people said it's that way. So yeah, not perfect, but it's the best option we've got. All right, so that's what. Yeah, so this is where the previous, where the 13 sites were in the previous survey. We did aim to get to these same listing posts, and this is when the park was a conservation area, but it did go to a national park in 2016. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to that site exactly. So some of these sites took like 9 days to collect 3 days of data. It was a lot. On paper, it looked really easy. Oh, it's 4 kilometers to the next one. In reality, really hard. Lots of it's basically a maze of all these different tracks, and you talk to local people in the park to try and get to that location. So we got within 1.2 kilometers, 1.3 kilometers of those posts. This is very dense bamboo. Even though I'm not talking about logging in great detail, we did use it in that model. We're looking at environmental variables and density of gibbons. So we did assess logging. We did this by using transects. Basically, for that little listing post within a 2 kilometer radius, we randomly selected the starting point for the central line transect. We'd also have, so we 3 of us, and someone would be basically 40 meters that way, 40 meters that way, and all 3 of us would walk 500 meters. Again, on paper, easy to do. In a forest, not that easy. So basically, we weren't able to always complete those transects, which is why it's a maximum of 6 locations. So for each of those log trees that we found that had a circumference of 75 centimeters or more, we came together and we measured, took a GPS point, measured various things, identified the species and estimated the felling time. And this is just some of the sites. Beautiful views, but hard to navigate. So this is what it looked like. So our listing post, you can see here, this is a bit further southwest than the other survey. And the circle here is the radius for the logging assessment, so a 2 kilometer radius. All right, so the statistical analysis. So first we need to identify the different groups. And so in the literature, they say that if a given group, two detections are 500 meters away or more than 500 meters away, then they're different gibbon groups. So we use this general rule of thumb, but we also use others as well. So the start and stop time of the gibbon calls, any identifiable characteristics, like the number of offspring that we could hear, that Twitter phase at the end, the proximity to listing posts. So if someone thought they heard a gibbon, but the person closer to that call didn't actually hear it, or they should have heard it and they didn't, we took that into consideration. Because these calls do last like 10 to 30 minutes, sometimes the gibbons will stop calling for a little bit and then start again, and people may detect that. I think that's 2 different groups. Overlapping call time, so if 2 gibbon groups are heard at the same time, then obviously different groups. We excluded the male solo calls because they may not be part of a mated pair. However, we did include them in some cases for further calls. So if someone thought a call was 1.5 kilometers away, they may not have heard that female, but from a listing post that was closer to that call, they may have heard that female. We found that was the case. So sometimes the male part of the call would travel a lot further than the female part would. So that's when we'd include those calls. We also excluded repeat calls, because gibbons do sometimes call multiple times in the morning. Alright, so for the model, we use an acoustic spatial capture recapture model, which estimates the density of the given groups calling on any given day at any given location. To calculate or estimate the total number of given groups, we need to use the calling probability, which we first had to calculate. We did this by using the 37 groups that were heard from at least 500 meters or closer from at least one listing post on at least one day. And this is to almost guarantee that we'd hear those calls. So because gibbons may call, if we estimate it was like 1 kilometre away, the next day they might have been 1.5 kilometres away, or we may not have heard that call. So we used the ones that were 500 metres or less. So we use a number of predictive variables, as I mentioned. So we use, for the distance to log trees, we use our data that we collected during our logging surveys, so those GPS points. For the other, so forest type, canopy height, distance to villages, rivers and streams, and elevation, we use data provided by Conservation International or obtained online from online databases. All right, so this is what we've done. So we identified 92 gibbon groups from the 13 sites. There was variation in the number of gibbon groups at those sites, so 2 to 14 groups per site. 68 of those groups were heard by more than one listening post, and 55 were heard on 2 days. So, as I said, we want to look at the relationship between gibbon density and different environmental variables. And the model that had the lowest AIC value was the model with 4 environmental variables, which were canopy height, forest type, and distance to villages and logging. And so these are, so basically the further away that you got from logging villages, the more gibbons that you would higher density of gibbons, and also canopy height, so the higher the canopy, the higher density of gibbons. We also saw that there was a high density of gibbons in semi-evergreen forest compared to, in evergreen forest compared to semi-evergreen forest. But because we weren't actually able to assess logging in the entire park, we couldn't use this variable when we were determining the total number of gibbon groups in the park. And so we used basically the best fit model that had 3 variables, so without logging. And we estimated that there's 389 gibbon groups in Sai-Siem National Park. And so it's still one of the largest populations of this species in the world. All right, and the final part, which is the effects of chainsaw noise on the activity budgets and calling behaviour. All right, so as I said, lots of logging going on in the park. This means chainsaw noise. Okay, so anthropogenic noise has been shown to affect many different animals in various ways, not just vocal behaviour, but also non-vocal behaviour. It's being found to be the same in primates, but there hasn't been much research done on apes, including gibbons. And so we wanted to determine the effects of chainsaw noise on the calling probability and the activity budgets of this species. So to do this, we collected data on the only habituated gibbon group in Sai-Siem National Park, which is referred to as Group A. So this group has been studied before, so various different research projects, and also they're also the focus of a community-based tourism program as well. So at the time of the first study period, so at the end of 2017, there was adult male, adult female, and 2 juveniles and 1 adult male. There was an infant born about 6 weeks before the second study period. So we collected data on 165 days across these 2 study periods. We commenced data collection about 30 minutes before sunrise, as the peak waiting time is around about 1 hour from 30 minutes before sunrise, which we found in our previous study. But we recorded start and stop time or finish time of any chainsaw activity that we heard within that 1 hour period. And we stopped collecting data if we heard that group call. Because the calling behaviour can be impacted by other variables, such as weather variables, we did include other predictive variables in our model, and so collected information on fog, wind, cloud cover and rain about 20 minutes before sunrise. And at the research station, we recorded the daily minimum and maximum temperature as well. For the analysis, so we use a generalized linear model, and we use a drop-one function, which is a single term deletion process. So yeah, the outcome was binary. So did the group call yes or no, and so on. And then for the activity budgets, so on these, we actually followed this group. So we either did it on the full day follows, which are basically followed the group around in the habitat for 9 to 11 hours. Otherwise, we followed the half-day follows, so 4 to 5 hours a day. We used an ethogram, so basically it's a list of behaviours. The main behaviours were travel, feeding, social, self-grooming, resting, scanning, and other. So during this time, so when we were collecting data, we also collected chainsaw activity on a noise intensity scale. So basically 1 was the closest, so that chainsaw is occurring in the home range, and 5 was, it's very far away, you could barely hear it. So we used 2 different sampling methods. The first was scan sampling. So this is where we had, so every 10 minutes, we had 1 minute to look around and write down what each of the gibbons were doing. So each behaviour, and we also say whether there was chainsaw noise during that time. In between those scan samples, we also conducted focal animal samples for 5 minutes. So basically you rotate through different gibbons. For that 5 minutes, you follow that one gibbon around and record times that gibbon changed change behaviours and say what that behaviour was. During this time, we also wrote down the stop and start time of all chainsaw activity that we heard and the noise intensity of that chainsaw. This is basically just a bit of an action shot. So basically what they kind of look like in the field, they move very fast. Very difficult to spot sometimes. Thankfully, there was 2 of us. So if you're all riding and look up like where they go, someone's already watching them. So definitely a team effort. All right, so for this statistical analysis, so we used data from 131 days across the 2 dry seasons for scan samples. This is just over 14,000 behavioral records. We used a generalized linear effects, mixed effects model. With binomial distribution. Again, we use that drop one function as well. We had various mixed effects as a number of these variables can impact given behaviours. And random effects. So we included the individual gibbon as a random effect and also time block. So this is the 2-hour periods throughout the day to account for some of that natural variation in the activity budgets. As gibbons are typically quite active in the morning, and before we're in the sleep site, they rest at certain periods of the day, and so on. All right. And we did include the number of observers as well, because sometimes there were choices. We analysed the frugal animal samples in a similar way, but because the data was over dispersed, we used beta binomial models. And I should say too that basically, so with the scan sample, we basically had 6 different models. So for the 6 main behaviours, did that behaviour occur, yes or no? So travel, yes, no. For the focal animal samples, so it was out of the 300 seconds, so it was a proportion. So for example, maybe they were travelling for 97%. And so yeah, again, we had 6 different models. We did try and find a very beautiful model that incorporated all of those behaviours in one, but we did not find it. So what did we find? So for calling probability, we did find that the gibbons called more on days when chainsaw activity was not present, so when chainsaw was absent. However, this was not a significant trend. Out of all the variables, the only one that had a significant impact was cloud cover. So the gibbons called more when there was low cloud cover compared to when there was no cloud cover. For the activity budget, so what we had hypothesized that we would see, well, we thought that chainsaw noise, when the chainsaw noise is high, we see an increase in vigilance, so increase in scanning. We thought they'd rest less, and we also thought they'd travel more. When chainsaw noise was low, we thought we wouldn't actually see any differences because they've been exposed to chainsaw noise for a really long time. However, we did actually find chainsaw noise, or hear chainsaw noise on 80% of our data sampling days. However, we actually found there was an increase in resting time and a decrease in scanning, so not what we thought at all. So very surprising, but our theory with this is potentially that we thought that it may be distracting to the gibbons. So they only have finite attention. Maybe when the chainsaw noise is happening, they're just distracted by it, and that's increasing the resting time. Of course, it would be great to have more research in this area done, because we do only have 1 gibbon group that we studied. And I just want to say too, that a lot of the chainsaw activity was far away. So it is possible that if there was a lot of close chainsaw noise, and also if they could see the lows, that this may have had a different result. But yeah, definitely an area for future research. I just wanted to finish up by saying too that of course none of these like logging, chainsaw noise, hunting pressure, they're not just mutually exclusive, like they are all intertwined. And when, you know, basically we need more research in this area. The logging is opening the forests up to these gibbons. We know they make these loud calls. We're basically advertising, here I am, come get me, if there were hunters. The hunters would know where to go. So yeah, definitely an area of more research. So that was in English. Definitely need more research in this area. I just want to acknowledge Conservation International, who is our collaborating partner, the Veun from Conservation International, all of our legal translators and our research assistants, Alice Richardson from the ANU Statistical Consulting Unit, and the following organisations who support this research. And I'd like to also just thank my supervisors with the panel. I'd like to thank my supervisors, Alice McGrath and Phyllis Malone, and of course, the statisticians at University of Auckland, Ben and Jean. And we've just got some references. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great chat about keywords and all the stats and research that you've done. I will let you select the people in the audience that you're going to answer, but I will get us started with one question. I was just listening to your first part about doing the interviews at the villages and all that, and that just prompted a question about what were the challenges of doing research in Cambodia, especially dealing with people and translator and all that, and if there were any things that you would have done differently looking back.
Yeah, so thankfully Conservation International has done a lot of work in these communities, and there'd also been like studies done, as I mentioned, in those villages before. So it's not like, even though it was an illegal activity like the hunting, people are still open and willing to talk about it. The translation definitely, yeah. So some people only spoke, we had two translators, so basically English to Khmer, and then Khmer to Quebec all out. So in an ideal world, yeah, at least only use one. So that's one of the challenges. People are pretty good just about speaking about it. Yeah, it's very, hunting for these local people is of cultural significance. Like it's something they teach their children. They got taught by their parents generally. It's very complicated, of course. Like you don't want to come in and seem like you're trying to tell them, like, don't hunt, don't do this. But yeah, so I think that was one of the main things with the translators. Other things, logging in general. Some of the other challenges I think were basically, yeah, reaching the sites in the park. So especially food, getting enough food, our motorbikes, trying to get the motorbikes up the hill, finding water because it was dry season. But yeah, so the further away you got from that listening post, the more you had to walk in the dark. Bears was another one. We're like, oh, there's a bear at that listening post. And like, oh, that's fine, I'll still go. No, you won't. We'll move that listening post somewhere else. But yeah, as I said, chicks, I was okay. The gibbon sat down in the same spot for 2 hours, and I sat down directly in a chick nest, and I didn't know until afterwards. Like, oh, so yeah. But anyway, so many challenges. But yeah, definitely a great experience.
I can imagine that the risk assessment from ANU to do that sort of research would have been insane. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thanks very much for a great talk. You've spoken here and there about, you know, declines or increases and that kind of thing, and the sort of different insights actually that some of the people who are in the forest all the time had compared to the data. Just wonder if you could speak a bit about, you know, what data there actually are to be confident about, you know, changes in abundance of these species that have happened over time. So do we have any real clear idea, or is it kind of a bit messy and difficult to compare?
It's not great, to be honest. Yeah, like with the pygmy so lows, I think the last survey I could find was from 2012. A lot of them, yeah, like, I think that was really it. So the gibbon, so yeah, they've been assessed, that's been estimated twice now. The duke, so that's the only population of the red-shaped duke-langer in Cambodia that they know of. That's been called camera traps, but there hasn't been any research into that population. The long-tailed macaque, again, I think this comes mainly from talking with local communities. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see with the long-tailed macaque. So basically, China was one of the biggest exporters of long-tailed macaques, and in 2019, they stopped doing that. At the same time, there seems to have been a shift to Cambodia. So Cambodia was exporting long-tailed macaques, but that wrapped up after China stopped exporting them. And then COVID. So given that long-tailed macaques had been targeted in the past for biomedical testing research, this definitely played a part in capturing these individuals, placing them into captive breeding programs, because yeah, people suspect that animals are caught from the wild into these breeding facilities. And yeah, so in 2022, it was listed as endangered, because I think there's a perception, especially for long-tailed macaques, that, oh, they're doing great, they're everywhere. People don't like them, like they're pests. People even cull them in some countries. And now it's like, oh, it's actually endangered. So yeah, and even the things like loris, we don't even know for sure if it's in the park. So it'll be very interesting to see how the pygmy loris is doing. It's been 12 years. But yeah, definitely need more research. But yeah, I guess funding is the big thing too. But definitely we need to know. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely sorry.
It was fantastic talking.
Same.
I had a question about your acoustic work. It sounds incredibly labour intensive and amazing amount of effort. But I'm just wondering, would you be able to get the same results if you used acoustic recordings like remote recorders we put out there for a period of time?
That is a great question. I think some people have spoken about read that use recorders like that. Yeah, I guess you've got to go to because it's so far anyway, because it's a certain place, like in this park, you'd have to travel and set them up. There'd be a lot of background noise as well, because at sunrise, there's so many other things happening. All the birds make their calls, cicadas, oh my God. But yeah, so I think, I mean, possibly, no one seems to have really done that, that I know of. I wonder one day whether it will become a drone, like if drones can be used to spot gibbons. But yeah, I haven't really come across that much actually. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was just curious with so you were surprised at the result with correct me if I've got this wrong, the reduction in kind of scanning when there was chainsaw noise.
Yeah.
What would they be scanning for, and is there some relationship that might be like, is it predatory birds and then birds hate the chainsaw so they're chilling, or kind of, do you have any more guesses as to what might be driving that?
Yeah, so I can't remember which species it was specifically, but in some animals, so when there's background noise, so there's traffic or chainsaw noise, it makes the animals really vigilant. So I think because they were able to hear predators coming, so it's like, oh, what's that? So they just spend a lot more time being vigilant. With the gibbons, yeah, we thought that would be the case when chainsaw noise is high, but it could be just either it's because the chainsaws are really far away, or just they're used to it. But yeah, there's a distracted prey hypothesis, but it basically says that animals only have a finite amount of attention. And they did find crabs. There was one was like when there was background noise, predators were able to get closer to the animals. Pretty sure it was crabs. So yeah, because they, in theory, they were distracted by that noise and looking in the direction of that noise. It's different here, of course, with chainsaws because they're not actually looking directly at the chainsaws. We're hoping also to get, because logging did absolutely occur in the home range while we were studying these gibbons, but it seemed to have occurred at night. And people basically they didn't log while in the home range because they knew we were there. So in our ideal world, we've had more of a mix. We've had more, because we know it's happening anyway. We've had some that are close, some of the chainsaw noise that are closer to the gibbons as well as further away. Yeah. Was, as I said, surprising. I definitely like a bigger number of groups, and because other research has been conducted into anthropogenic noise in primates, they found that the response in primates isn't actually uniform. So even like in the same troop of monkeys, different males will react differently. I think it was howler monkeys to different anthropogenic noise. So definitely need that bigger sample size.
Just a comment rather than a question from, excuse me, Carolina Indrasvari online. It's an amazing talk. The movement of trade from one region to another is so similar to many trades. The same happens with songbirds. They move and shift, expanding to other regions. Very concerning, yet interesting similarities of trade in different taxa.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder how much like social media has played into that too. Like even people being able to sell animals on social media, it's got a much bigger reach than it used to for primates, and I'm sure other animals as well. Any other questions?
So if as long as no one else. I must say I hadn't realised how kind of pervasive primate hunting actually is. Are there risks to, as well as conservation risks, are there disease transmission risks associated with people hunting and dismembering primates and so on?
Yeah, haven't looked into that too much, but I know definitely during COVID that was a big consideration. I think a lot of people they wear masks, and you need to make sure that you're a certain amount, certain distance away from the primates. Hunting, the transmission of diseases with hunting, I'm not sure. So, but because they are able to get a lot of the disease that we had. I think orangutans like hepatitis B. So there are diseases. But I'm not sure about COVID. But not sure. Because obviously people are eating orangutans, gibbons or other primates, they may also get ill from eating those. It'll be interesting to hopefully guns don't become more prevalent in the area, but it's interesting, like even just the relationships between hunting in Cambodia versus hunting in Vietnam and Laos. So same with logging, like when other countries basically they have less trees to log, less primates to hunt and other animals, then they'll go to other countries as well. So definitely we've seen that in Laos as well with primates, that hunting's increased and some of them are exported to Vietnam. This is particularly problematic too, I believe, in the forests and protected areas around borders, like near Vietnam. But definitely a complicated one. There's so many moving parts, and even with logging, and of course, with that too is the poverty aspect too. Like, hunting is important to these people, and it's like, well, how you don't want to say don't do this. Maybe it's the way of getting people to find the benefit of keeping the forest intact, protecting those primates or even other animals as well. Giving them alternative incomes. But the sense that I got from reading all the literature is, the local people tend to lose out a lot of the time, even with logging and stuff. I've read different papers where people just said, well, I might as well do it because someone else will. Lots of very complicated. Anyone else?
Got two questions maybe to wrap it up. The first one is what was your motivation to study gibbons in Cambodia?
Well, I really find primates really interesting. So when I finished school, I was like, I don't know why. I think I was just reading a lot of books and like orangutans are really cool. So I volunteered with orangutans in Malaysia. So it's more animal husbandry role. I did that for a couple of months. 2010 and then 2012. And then I did some research in South Africa. Basically, it's really interesting. They're so like us, they're so not like us. And especially with small apes, they don't get enough attention. Basically, with great apes, like obviously they're not doing incredibly well, especially orangutans, but they do get a lot more research conducted on those animals, whereas gibbons, they just don't. So I didn't even know there was 20 species of gibbon. I didn't know much about them. I just knew that I wanted to study, I wanted a project that was in conservation and studying primates. And thankfully, Alison and you had some projects for PhDs. But it's an incredible experience. Well, that was the main motivator. It's just, it's not, primates are just very, very interesting. It's not that I really find primates interesting, but it's a very important conservation.
And then looking back at your PhD and the role that you have now at TERN, are there any links between that work that you did and your current role, or is it a completely separate thing?
I think there's links for sure. Just even understand, like, even I got so many skills from my PhD, like presenting at conferences, working like with communities, and even just understanding how complicated it is. I really enjoyed like working with NGOs, and I think one thing I really took away was that it's a team effort. Like there's so many different organizations involved with this. There's no easy solution. And I really like with the threatened species index too, that we get to work with a lot of people as well, data custodians. But yeah, it's just, yeah, different skills, and yeah, I really enjoy the shift back to Australia for this project as well. So, because before I did my PhD, I actually studied stick insects on Lord Howe Island, so I was Australian based, and yeah, then I went back overseas and outback, so yeah, it's great.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, I think that's it. Thank you, Sarah, for your talk, and thank you.